Okay, good morning. Let's get started. Congratulations, you don't have anything due next Monday night. So between today, Tuesday the 22nd, and a little less than 3 weeks from now, you're working on your A/B testing, which you will distill down into a written report and oral presentation, that is, both of which are due in Brightspace at 11:59 p.m. Monday night on May the 5th. Okay, I'm going to spend a few minutes this morning talking about A/B testing, and then next week I'll talk about the written report and oral presentation. Fair? Okay, so let's talk about A/B testing for a moment. We're going to orient this discussion using the familiar fitness curve. So I'm going to write uppercase G for generations. This is evolutionary time. Some of you are working with a parallel hill climber. Some of you are working with bi-objective optimization at this point. Some of you are working with the genetic algorithm. Whatever it is, you have a population of candidate solutions to your problem in generation 0, and those candidate solutions are random, and they're probably pretty bad at whatever you want your robot to do. For this morning's discussion, let's assume that you're trying to maximize F. Some of you are trying to minimize F. Doesn't really matter. Okay. Let's imagine you run your parallel hill climber or your bi-objective optimization, and at every generation, you're observing the most fit individual in the population at that time. The first thing you're hoping for in A/B testing is that fitness starts to rise over evolutionary time. So the first thing you're looking for in A/B testing, and the first thing we're going to look for in your oral presentations, is, did your evolutionary algorithm do anything? Is fitness higher here than it was at the beginning? Yeah? If we just plot the most fit individual over time, you might get a curve like this. Has the evolutionary algorithm done anything? Looks good. Fitness is going up. Maybe the most fit individual in your initial random population had a value of 1.2. And the most fit individual in the population after 20 generations have elapsed, let's say, just arbitrarily, is 1.203. Has your evolutionary algorithm done anything? Now, it's not so obvious, right? The whole point of A/B testing is to collect, over the next 3 weeks, collect as much data as you can. Now, not everybody has the same powered laptop, so you do the best you can. This is the key to success in the final project in this course, is data collection. The more you have, the more you will be able to defend your claim, whatever your claim is. My claim at the moment is that fitness has gone up in this population over 20 generations. I don't have a lot of data, and the data that I do have doesn't look very convincing at the moment that things are working. Yeah? Okay, so maybe I go back and I start my parallel hill climber, or I start my bi-objective optimizer again, and maybe at this point it starts here, and maybe it climbs here. I do a third run, I rewind the evolutionary tape. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Okay. At some point, if I've collected enough runs, I can say something about the average value here and the average value here. At this point, it looks like the means are different. They may not be different by a lot, but it looks like the means are different. If they aren't, then there's probably something wrong in your code, or your fitness function is just too difficult. You have time over the next 3 weeks to debug your evolutionary algorithm and make sure that evolution is occurring. This is not a statistics class, so I don't expect any of you to be doing any sophisticated statistics. That being said, if you know how to handle a statistical test and get back a p-value will tell us whether or not, or how much confidence we can have in whether these two means are different. Okay, again, it's not a statistics class. You can get away without a p-value if you collect enough data. With more and more data, if these means start to look different, you can start to trust that they are different. For this class, in this class, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. If you collect enough data and the means look different, great. Obvious question at this point is, how much data? It depends. If the mean here is 1.2 and the mean over here is 1.203, those means are not different by very much. You're probably going to have to do more runs to see whether or not there actually is a difference. So far, so good? Okay, so we haven't even talked about A/B testing yet, but the first thing we want you to prove to yourself and then prove to the TA and myself is that your evolutionary algorithm is actually doing something. If there's no real difference between these means, then you don't need the evolutionary algorithm at all. You can just generate a whole bunch of random controllers and or random bodies for your robot, and you'll eventually get something. Okay. As I mentioned, we'll talk about the written report in the oral presentation next week, but the first thing we want to see in your oral presentation is 2 videos. A video of a randomly behaving robot, and then the behavior of the most fit or one of the most fit robots you obtained in your experiment so far. And hopefully we should be able to see within a few seconds that there's an obvious difference. Evolution has occurred. All good. Questions about any of that? Okay, let's talk about A/B testing now. If you go back to the final project, instructions, and you scroll down to the end here where it mentions yesterday by last night, show preliminary results from your A/B test. If you click on A/B test here, it'll take you through to a subreddit that walks you through exactly how to do A/B testing. I'm not going to read off the subreddit to you. We'll just do a little bit of it at the board for now. Okay, so let's imagine you do one evolutionary run of A, whatever your A variant is. Let's assume that you're comparing evolution of quadrupedal locomotion to evolution of hexapedal locomotion. So A is our little familiar friend, the quadruped. You get one run of A. You then go back to a random population, and now you start running your code in B mode. And you get for the first run of your B test, which let's say is your hexapod, you get this. This is what we were hoping you submitted last night. One run of A and one run of B. For the purposes of M4, we didn't expect for you to prove to us that A is better than B or B is better than A or that there's no difference between them. How could you? You only have one run of each. I've already kind of given you the punchline here. Is it easier for the evolutionary algorithm to evolve brains for your hexapod or to evolve brains for your quadruped? Who knows, right? We only have one piece of data at the moment. Looks promising for the hexapod at the moment. What are you going to be doing over the next few days? Collecting more data, right? Okay. So you do another run of A and another run of B. Uh-oh, okay. Now what can we conclude? Nothing, right? Okay. Another run of A, another run of B. Like we were just mentioning before, when we're looking to see whether you collect evidence that the evolutionary algorithm is doing anything, it depends on what your A and B is. Some of you may get lucky and you may get a very different picture. With relatively few runs, there may be a very clear separation between A and B. You may get a couple of runs of A that look like this and a couple of runs of B that looks something like this. Maybe with just these 3 runs, again, there's no p-value associated here. We have no statistical test to defend the claim that A is greater than B, but the data itself seems to be suggesting that whatever your A variant is, it's easier for the evolutionary algorithm to evolve higher values of F for A than it is for B. If you got the previous picture that I just drew on the board, 3 runs probably isn't going to do it. You're going to need 4, 5, 6, 7. So most of you are doing your own final projects now. I don't have the answers for you. It's up to the experiment to tell you how much or how little data you need to collect. Yeah? If you find yourself in the fortunate position of this a few days from now and you're wondering what to do with the rest of your 3 weeks, do some analysis. See if you can figure out why, for example, A is doing much better than B. It's not a required part of the final project. It's optional to do some analysis, but if you want to, by all means, come on by my office hours or the TA's office hours, and we can talk through analysis. Okay. Any questions about that so far? Okay. In the cartoon example here, I seem to have pretty strong evidence that A is doing better than B. It's enough in the written report and the oral presentation to just demonstrate it. A is better than B. I have no idea why A is better than B, but the data suggests that it is. That's perfectly fine. Okay. Alternatively, you might get a picture where B is better than A. Same thing. I don't know why, but here's some ideas or hypotheses why I think B may be better than A, but I haven't done any analysis. I just have the data suggesting that it is. What happens if you collect quite a bit of data and there doesn't seem to be an actual separation between A and B? The means at the end, the mean fitness of the best individuals in the population at the end seem to be, for B, are overlapping A. This is also a perfectly fine result for the final project. If I have enough runs of both, I can reasonably defend the claim that it's equally easy for evolution to evolve brains for A than it is for B. So A is better than B, B is better than A, or there is no difference between them, perfectly fine. I've mentioned this a few times, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but just to make this crystal clear, something like the following: 2 runs of each. I'm trying to defend the claim that there's no difference between A and B. I don't believe you. There's not quite enough data yet. And again, it's hard to say how much you actually need. What we don't want to see in the final projects is, I don't know yet whether there's a difference between A or B or not. Okay. Any questions about that? No? Okay. One other thing I want to talk about in terms of A/B testing is what's known as apples and oranges comparison. In all of the cartoon examples we've been discussing so far this morning, we're plotting the results of A and the results of B in terms of F, or we're comparing A and B in terms of F. The assumption here is that you used exactly the same fitness function in A and B. If that's your final project, for example, I'm evolving jumping for the quadruped and jumping for the hexapod. Jumping is the fitness function. They have exactly the same fitness function in common. That's an apples to apples comparison. You can compare them on the same axis because you evolve them against the same objective. For some of you, you might have the beginnings of apples to oranges comparison. You may be evolving, you may be trying out 2 different fitness functions. For example, you may be trying to evolve jumping for the quadruped, and you're trying to use 2 different fitness functions to get the robot to jump better. You might have one fitness function for A and a separate fitness function for B. If you do a bunch of runs of A and a bunch of runs of B, how are you then going to defend the claim that one of these 2 fitness functions facilitated the evolution of jumping better than the other fitness function? Thoughts? Normalize the values. Okay, possibly. Tell us what do you mean by that?
Put the interval of their possible values in between 0 and 1, and then.
Okay, so make sure they both have the same range of values. Okay, so let's go with the example of trying to come up with different ways to evolve jumping for the quadruped. Let's assume that f sub a maximizes the number of time steps in which all 4 feet are off the ground. If I'm running my simulation for 1,000 time steps, then f sub a can range between 0, meaning there is no time step in which all 4 feet are off the ground, and theoretically 1,000. For every time step, all 4 feet are off the ground. Very unlikely that your evolutionary algorithm is going to get this high, but that's the range of values for f sub a. Let's assume f sub b, the fitness function f sub b, is going to evolve robots to have the greatest height as possible. I don't know what the height of your robot could be, but let's assume it ranges between 0 and 2. Very different fitness functions, but both are trying to evolve jumping for the quadruped. As you mentioned, we could normalize both of these ranges. Let's keep it simple. Let's normalize them so that they both lie between 0 and 1. Can I now plot them on the same axis and conclude that the A's and the B's are different or not? Have I turned my apples and oranges comparison into an apples to apples comparison? If we were to normalize the fitness values from these two different experimental variants and plot them, and you saw that most of the curves for A tended to be above most of the curves for B, could I then conclude that evolving for keeping feet off the ground produces better jumping than maximizing height? Shaking your head.
So.
Why not?
Because they're just two different actions, and so it's how do you compare them?
How do we compare them? They're still very different behavioral actions. One is keep your feet off the ground. The other is stay up as high as possible. Still hard to do. The normalization was a good idea, but it hasn't allowed us to escape from an apples to oranges comparison. How might we take this cartoon example of two very different ways of evolving jumping and compare them? Which of these two, how might we, given the fact that we have data from these two experimental variants, how could we get to this one produces better jumping, or this one produces better jumping, or they both produce about the same goodness of jumping?
How many generations until it starts jumping?
Okay, how many generations until it starts jumping, but how do we measure starting jumping? With this or with this? It's not easy. This is a big part of the scientific process, being able to compare things fairly. Ideas?
Well, you'd kind of have to, even though you're evolving them with different fitness functions, you'd have to evaluate them with the same fitness function to compare them. So you could keep track of how long it keeps its feet off the floor, even if you're not evolving for that behavior.
Exactly. Good observation. So ultimately, we're going to have to measure our evolved robots or our evolved controllers against the same fitness function somehow. So we could pick one of these and say that's the one. This is the one that we're going to use to measure jumping. But that seems kind of unfair, right? A by definition now has an unfair advantage over this one because we're directly selecting for the thing that we're interested in. Tricky. Other ideas?
I mean, it feels like you almost want
third metric that's independent of those two entirely? Because if you started to even just do like a linear combination, then you're kind of just normalizing again, and that doesn't get you out of that.
So one way to escape the apples to oranges comparison is to introduce pairs. You have a third metric, which also is some sort of reasonable approximation of jumping. Maybe it is also not perfect. But if you evolve for C and you look at evolved controllers for C, it looks something like jumping, something that's independent of these other two. What might be a candidate for that in the case of jumping? A is keep your feet off the ground. B is be as high as possible. You could do this. I want both. It's not perfectly satisfying, but it's on the way. So strategically for the final project, we'd like to see you make if you have different fitness functions, if you find yourself in a situation where you're doing apples to oranges comparison, just saying, look, we got higher values for when we evolved for A than we did for B. Duh, we would expect to see higher values here than here. If you compare it to something else, we see some effort that you're trying to extricate yourself from apples to oranges testing, good enough. If it's not perfect, that's okay. Other strategies, other things we could do. We've seen a few times in this course fitness functions that include terms that are meant to sort of help the primary term. Remember when we talked about bipedal locomotion? The obvious fitness function for locomotion is d, distance traveled. But if we have F equals d in the case of the passive dynamic walker that walks bipedally down the decline, the easiest thing to do is fall head first and slide down the decline. So they multiply d by a whole bunch of penalty terms. These are known as auxiliary fitness terms. Auxiliary in the sense that they're kind of training wheels. They're trying to help with the main thing that you're interested in. So one way you can partially extricate yourself from apples to oranges comparison is if you have F equals X, the thing that you're actually really interested in, jumping. That might be A. You might ask the question in B is what happens if you multiply X by some sort of auxiliary term that kind of helps. X could be, for example, the height of the robot. You want to evolve jumping, and intuitively being as high off the ground as possible is good, but we all know that at this point, X is vulnerable to perverse instantiation. Y could be the number of contiguous time steps in which all 4 feet are off the ground. It's possible that selecting for keeping all feet off the ground and maximizing height might lead to the thing you actually want, and you might, in the end, in B, actually get better values for X. You might actually get higher off the ground than if you select for it directly. I don't know if there's any gardeners here, but this is true in plant and animal domestication. If you selectively breed chickens to be as big as possible or tomatoes to be as big as possible, it works for a couple of generations, and then it turns out you can't get them to be any bigger. You have to select for other things, and that opens up other pathways in the fitness landscape to get you off of local optima and eventually find your way to higher optima, no pun intended. Yeah? Question?
So in this case, if you're comparing the two, you would just still use the value of X.
Exactly. So A is this, B is this, and when you plot the fitness curves to try and see whether this produced more of this, if this produced more of this than this alone, you plot this, yeah? So this is an apples to apples comparison because you're interested in apples. X is apples. The orange, the thing you introduced, that's a little bit different. You're eventually going to throw it away. It's the training wheels. It's a helper. It's trying to help the evolutionary process. Yeah? The tricky situation that we just talked about a few minutes ago is this, right? Then how do you compare these? Not so easy. Any questions about any of that? Okay, I think we'll leave things there for now. So you're just starting to collect this data. What I want you to take away from this morning's discussion is a warning. Be careful, make sure that you're doing an apples to apples comparison. If you're not, you might want to think about changing your setup a little bit now before you get to the end of the semester. Any questions about any of that? Okay. Happy to talk about A/B testing more on Thursday, and next Tuesday, I'll talk about the written what you should write up in the written report and what you should prepare for the oral presentation. Okay, so back to lecture material. We're going to finish off our segment today on collective robotics. A lot of real-world tasks out there in the real world in which it's probably going to be hard to make one big, complicated, smart robot to solve the task. We want many smaller, simpler robots to solve the task. Not an easy thing to do. We'll finish that off today in lecture 20, and we'll move into the final theme of the course, which is broadening the evolutionary algorithm to optimize aspects of both the brain and the body of our robots. We've already seen a few examples already, but we'll dive in a little bit deeper. Okay, back to lecture 20 on the evolution of communication, which we introduced last time. Just a refresher, we've got male and female robots in this experiment, 800 females, 800 males. We are dealing with a donut. Again, we've got a donut that is then covered with grid paper. So the 800 M's and the 800 F's initially are dropped into random points in this grid. And the males and females have non-overlapping sensor motor capabilities. Some are better at some sensor motor capabilities than others. Females can't hear anything, they can't move, but they can sing. Males cannot see, but they can hear. They cannot signal, and they're mobile. This particular experiment, quite old at this point, still a classic in the field, because although it might not look like it, the investigators were interested in collective intelligence. How do we create autonomous machines autonomously? How do we evolve these things to do something that's beyond the ability of any one of them? In this case, it's sex. It takes two to tango. The interesting thing about this experiment is right in the name of the title. They are not going to build in communication, but there is, as you'll see in a moment, there is evolutionary pressure for the males and females to find each other. There are ways in which they can find each other by not communicating. And it turns out that there are better ways for them to find each other more quickly, more often, if they evolve the ability to communicate. The evolution of communication has occurred several times in nature. We are one of the species that has managed this feat. It's not easy. Why is the evolution of communication not easy? And by not easy, I mean that there has to be a series of mutations that make slight changes to the phenotype that gradually, evolutionarily alter a species from non-communicating into a communicating species. Why is it hard? Even if there's an advantage to communication, which our species exemplifies that there is, why is it difficult for evolution to find it?
I feel like it's a relatively complex combination of a lot of different mutations.
It is absolutely a complex combination of a lot of different mutations. What do those sequence of mutations, generally speaking, what do those mutations have to accomplish? What do they have to instill into the phenotypes of members of that species in order for them to communicate successfully?
I think a huge part of it is that a lot of communication is learned behavior. So your phenotype kind of gives you the ability to communicate, the way to move your tongue a certain way to make certain sounds. But we know if you raise a human being in different environments,
Yes.
the way they communicate will be vastly different.
Great point. So in our species, we learn to communicate and we evolved that ability. So in our case, it was the evolution of learning to communicate. We're looking at a simpler case, which is also still difficult. You're right, learning itself is difficult. In our case, even learning to articulate the sounds that make up our preferred form of communication, which is verbal communication. Tricky. We're going to remove the learning part, just evolution of communication. There are many species in nature that communicate that do not learn. Any examples? We'll go back. You all live in student housing, probably infested with ants. Ants are fantastic communicators. They can do it from birth. They do, as far as we know, they don't learn it. What's difficult about even just evolving communication? There's lots of things that are difficult about it. There's two main hurdles that evolution has to get over. And if you're missing either of these two things, communication does not work. You need to achieve both. What are they?
Well, I guess before communication is an evolved trait, there's different, whatever, like organisms that have different phenotypes that may not necessarily be compatible for communication. So the trait of communication may not evolve with them without their ability to combine.
Without their ability to combine what? What are the two main things you need to be able to participate in communication? We are participating in it right now. There's two parts.
You have to be able to transmit and receive information.
You have to be able to transmit. I'm doing most of the transmission, and you have to be able to receive. If I think I'm a pretty good English speaker, if you were all non-English speakers, it would be useless, right? And vice versa. If I was up here speaking Mandarin and you were all native English speakers and didn't understand Mandarin, doesn't work. Evolution of communication, has been pointed out by a few of you already, requires a lot of things to line up before you start to get the benefits of communication. Yeah. So again, we're looking at a very simple experiment this morning, no physics engines, no fancy evolutionary algorithm, but we're going to see under what conditions the evolution of communication can happen. Okay, here we go. So we've got 800 females and 800 males. Every single one of these 1,600 agents has exactly the same neural architecture. They have a row of input neurons. This is for the females, same thing for the males. Each female and each male has a row of hidden neurons. You'll notice that each one of the 1,600 agents has recurrent connections and self connections in the hidden layer. And the female and males both have an output layer. So the females and males have non-overlapping sensor motor abilities, but they all have identical neural architecture. That's where the similarity stops. Each one of the 1,600 agents at the beginning of the simulation is going to have a unique set of synaptic weights. So they all have unique brains, but they all have the same neural architecture. So far, so good? Okay. These brains are in the females and males are controlling non-overlapping sensor motor abilities. So let's start with the females. As I mentioned before, the females can see, but they cannot hear. So what arrives at the input layer of each female neural network during each time step of the simulation? What arrives at the input layer is the position and orientation of the closest male to her in her visual range. I'm going to just jump ahead for a moment. Here's the visual range. Each female can see 2 units to her west, north, east, and south. So there are a total of 24 cells that she can see, not including the 25th, because that's where she is. And if there is a male inside that visual range, she can see that male. If there are two males in a female's visual range, so for this female, there are two males, she sees the closest one. So for every female at every time step in the simulation, that female either sees no males or one male. Okay. In this, it's a little hard to read here. In this cartoon hypothetical situation here, this female has detected a male to her southeast, and that male is facing east. Okay. You'll notice that inside her input neurons, there are zeros and ones. So this information is binarized. North, west, southeast, so forth, facing east, north, west, east. We won't talk about it, but this information gets boiled down into a binary vector, and those binary values are plugged into her input layer. If there are no males in her visual range, all of her input neurons are set to 0. So far, so good? Okay, so we have binary values, not unlike what probably most of you have in your code base at the moment. At every time step, we forward propagate those values. We take those values, multiply it by the synaptic weights to compute the values of the hidden layer. We take the values at the hidden layer, multiply them by the recurrent connections and the outgoing connections to compute the values arriving at the output layer. In the case of the females, a particular activation function is applied at the neurons that take those raw values arriving at the output neurons and squash them and discretize them to binary values. So the female receives binary information and generates a binary vector as output. Different females who have different sets of synaptic weights are going to produce different outputs. Okay, what is this binary vector? This is that female's song. So the song or sound produced by this female at this time step is emitting the song 1 0 1 0 0 1 1 0 1 0 1 1 0 1, whatever it is. It's an arbitrary song. Now, I should put scare quotes around song because song already connotes communication, right? What distinguishes noise from a song? It depends on the listener, right? So sound is probably a better term to use for now, yeah? So there's some particular sound that she emits. So far, so good? Okay, let's do the males. We have 800 males. Each male has a unique set of random synaptic weights. In the first time step, when we evaluate the brain of each of the 800 males, what is fed into the input layer of the male? If a male is, let's take this male here, if this male is outside of any female range, like this male here, the input to that male's neural network is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Males are blind, but they can hear. At this point in time, this male hears nothing. It's outside the sound radius of any female. This male happens to be inside the sensing radius of this female. This male would receive or would hear the sound emitted by that female. So far, so good? This particular male here actually is sitting within the song radius of two females. It's not explained in the paper. I'm going to guess they flip a coin. Heads, the male hears this song. Tails, the male hears that song. Doesn't really matter for our purposes. Okay, so this particular male has heard something, and again, we propagate the values arriving at the input layer to the hidden layer. We allow those values to propagate down to the output layer, and we do not apply an activation function in this case. We just leave the raw weighted sums that arrived at the output layer alone. In the case of the male, there are 4 output neurons. So 1, 2, and they should have just drawn a third and a fourth one here. These 4 motor neurons correspond to the 4 motor primitives that the males are capable of. We talked about motor primitives a while back. These are like simple actions that the male can perform. In this cartoon example here, we see that the output neuron associated with the motor primitive stay still has a value of -4. The second output neuron, which corresponds to the motor primitive move forward, has a value of 22. They don't show the third one, the third output neuron, which corresponds to turn left. The fourth and final motor neuron, which corresponds to the motor primitive turn right, has a value of 78. For this male at this time step, this male at that time step would turn right. They take just the largest of the 4 values, and that motor primitive gets triggered. So far, so good? Okay, so we have females that look for things and emit different sounds accordingly, and males hear things and act accordingly. So far, so good? Okay. All right. Okay. I mentioned last time that we are going to see evolution in a moment, but this is a very different evolutionary algorithm from any we've seen so far. There is no fitness function in any way. The males are moving around, and if by chance a male ever happens to find a female, meaning the male moves into the same cell as a female, a reproduction event takes place. Reproduction event is made up of 3 steps. We take the male and female parents that are now co-occupying that cell. We make a modified copy of each of their neural networks. So if this female and this male are co-locating, we make a randomly modified copy of this set of synaptic weights, which becomes the female offspring. We make a randomly modified copy of this set of synaptic weights, which becomes the male offspring. And every reproduction event, a male and female produce 1 male and 1 female offspring. It's kind of unsatisfying. There's no actual exchange of genetic material here. Males produce more males, females produce more females. Kind of an odd setup. This is in the spirit of the minimal cognition experiments. They're trying to keep things as simple as possible. Okay. We now have these 1 new male and 1 new female, the 2 offspring. We find some other male and some other female anywhere else on the toroid and overwrite them. The new male overwrites the existing male, and the new female offspring overwrites this random female. So death occurs on the toroid when you just happen to be walking around and you get overwritten by somebody else's offspring. Tough world. Okay. The last step of the reproduction event, we take the co-locating male and female parents, take them out of that cell, and place them in random unoccupied positions anywhere on the toroid. So far, so good? So if you're a male, how do you produce more male offspring? Find females. That will produce more male offspring. If you're a female, how do you produce more female offspring?
Call out more men.
Call out and hope that they interpret your call appropriately, right? Tricky, not so easy to do. Okay, here we go. This paper, as you can see, is pretty old, 1991, so long before fancy physics engines. So we're going to have to content ourselves with spreadsheets. My apologies. Okay, here we go. So in this particular experiment, we're starting with 1,600 random agents. And here are the 8 possible signals that the females can emit. In this experiment, they restricted the width of the output layer of the female to 3 binary neurons, 1, 2, 3, and they restricted the number of input neurons in the males to 3. So they're manually setting the length of the song. The length of the song is 3, and because songs are binary, that turns out that there's a total of 8 possible songs. So far, so good? Or sounds, sorry. They're not songs yet. Okay, so they sprinkled these 1,600 agents, and then the females started to emit random sounds, and the males tended to wander around at random because all of them have random brains. And over those 100 time steps, they computed when they observed every time a male wandered into a region in which a female was emitting the 000 song, what did that male do? 25% of the time, whenever a male heard 000, it went forward. 38% of the time, it turned right. 9% of the time, the males turned to the left. 28% of the time, males stood still when in the presence of this song. Let's go back and talk about time steps for a moment. There's no generations in this experiment. There's just, at every time step, they update the brains of all 800 females, and they update the brains of all 800 males. They let each of the 800 females emit their song, and they let each of the 800 males perform one of the 4 motor primitives. That's one time step. Do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. And during any of those time steps, if any male-female collocates, trigger a reproduction event. So for a given time step, there may be no reproduction events. The next time step, there may be 117 reproductive events, and so on. Everyone have a mental model of what this evolutionary process looks like? Okay. So again, over these 100 time steps, they also observed what did the males do when they were in the presence of the sound 001. 19% of the time, the males went forward, turned right, turned left, stood still, and so on for the other 6 songs. What's happening? They could have, I guess, made an animation of this. What would we be seeing?
I mean, it seems like they're still just kind of randomly moving around.
Not surprisingly, right? The males are moving around at random, and the fact that each of these 8 rows is populated, meaning there's numbers here, means that some female must have emitted 111. There were enough females that by chance they emitted from time to time all 8 songs in the presence of males, and this is what the males did. So we've got females that are emitting 8 different sounds, presumably at random, and the males look like they're moving at random. At the beginning of today's lecture, we were talking about whether or not we see the presence of evolution at work. Pretty sure at this point doesn't look like anything's happening, right? Not surprising. We're only 100 time steps in. This is the state of play after 5,000 time steps of exactly the same experiment. They just ran it further forward. What's happening now? If you're a male and the only thing you're interested in is reproduction, what's the worst possible thing you can do?
Stand still.
Stand still. What a surprise. The males that did that, they didn't produce many offspring, and they were eventually overwritten by other males' offspring who didn't stand still. So the first observation from this spreadsheet is evolution is now happening. Males are evolving to not stand still. There's many parallels we could draw between these agents and human males and females. I will not mention any of those parallels. You can think of them on your own. Okay, what else is happening?
Seems like they're just moving forward regardless of what the females say.
Yes, again, not drawing any parallels to human males. They're ignoring the females or their songs and just going straight. They're on a toroid, so why is that? Maybe not the best thing you could be doing, but certainly better than standing still. It's also better than turning left and turning right. Why?
Just toroid wraps upon itself, you're likely to encounter a female if there's one in that alley, whereas if you're just turning right or turning left, you'd be creating still a loop, but probably like a smaller loop than.
Assuming you turn left and then go forward a little bit and turn left again, right? You might be drawing or tracing a smaller loop on the toroid. Every time step in which a male turns left or turns right, they're staying in the same cell. By definition, they're not going to reproduce for that time step, right? They've kind of, in a way, wasted one time step. So it's an okay thing to just keep moving. Cover as much ground as you can, and the numbers game says you'll reproduce from time to time, at least better than those males that never did anything, or those males that just stood in place and turned left and turned left and turned left. So there is evidence of evolution occurring in the male population. Hard to say whether there's anything happening in the female population yet. The females are still emitting significant numbers of all 8 sounds because, again, you can see that there's numbers posted in all 8 rows for the males. So the males are hearing these 8 different sounds. Doesn't look like they're responding to it. So there was a point made earlier that in order for the evolution of communication to occur, you need transmitters and receivers. We certainly don't have any receivers yet, or at least we don't seem to have any males that are behaving as if they're receiving. Hard to know whether the females are transmitting yet or not. Okay, let's jump ahead another 2,500 time steps. Now what's happening? Typical males, right?
Yeah, they're just ignoring the females.
Just ignoring the females. Around and around they go on the toroid. Yeah? Doesn't look good for this experiment, right? This is certainly not the evolution of communication. Yep.
Is this maybe just a typo that the females no longer emit 000 in table 3?
Yep, sorry, good point. That's a typo. Absolutely, it's a typo. Should be 000. Okay, obviously we wouldn't be talking about this experiment if this is where it ended. It doesn't end here. They're going to run the experiment forward another 7,500 time steps. And the punchline is given away in the caption of the table. What's happening now? It turns out from the male's point of view, there's actually something better to do than just go straight. Most of the males now, most of the 800, whenever they hear 101, they stop going forward and turn right. When most of those males hear 110, they turn left. So there's a considerable period of time in which these males are not occupying a new cell at the next time step. They're turning in place. Looks pretty wasteful from the point of view of the males. So there better be a pretty good reason for doing so. What is it?
They can hear the sound that the female is emitting and moving towards it, her direction.
Probably,
Or
right?
turning towards her direction.
Turning towards her direction. There better be, this is a big cost. The males in the short term are incurring a cost. Stop moving and start turning. There better be, from the evolutionary perspective, better be a benefit for the males for doing so, which is why these males exist at 15,000 time steps. So there is indirect evidence now for the evolution of communication. If the females are emitting 101 at random, let's assume that there isn't any evolution of communication or any evolution going on in the females. They're just emitting 101 arbitrarily. Does it behoove the males to turn left whenever they hear 101? Absolutely not, right? It's not a reliable signal. In fact, 101 is not a signal at all. So it must be that the females are, quote unquote, choosing to emit 101 at the right time under the right circumstances, which is probably that the females sense a male that is in their territory but heading in the wrong direction, and the female says, turn right, and the males obey. When the males turn right, what do you think happens at that time step? Assuming this male listened and obeyed, the female has just emitted 101, which caused the male to turn right. What do you think happens at the immediate next time step?
Their signal changes to something else.
Don't keep telling the male to turn right, right? That's not good for the male, it's not good for the female. She probably stops. And it doesn't really matter too much what else she says or sings, because males left to their own devices still at this late date in the evolutionary process do what? Go straight. He can rely on the males to just go straight. Yeah? So there hasn't just been one word or one song that's emerged in this population. There's a second song which means or is interpreted by the males as turn left. One of the tricky things when we discuss communication in nature is the meaning of words. What does it mean to understand 101 or 110? There's still a debate going on about whether ChatGPT actually understands what it's saying, right? It's always a tricky argument, and I always find it very unsatisfying. What does it mean to understand something? Turing would say it depends on what you do, how you act, right? There's an operational definition. In this case, we're going to claim that the males understand what 101 means and what 110 means because they, quote unquote, do the right thing. From their perspective in an evolutionary sense, and from the female's perspective in an evolutionary sense. So at some point between 7,500 and 15,000, 101 and 110 have acquired meaning. There is a reliable transmitter, more than one probably, and there are a large number of reliable receivers. So far, so good? So somehow, and again, there was some series of mutations in this population that had to cause these two things to happen at once, or have these two things happen close enough in evolutionary time. Right? If the females always emitted the song 101 when the male should turn right in order to reproduce, but the males don't receive that signal is useless. You need both. You need two to tango. Okay. Here's an example of how this actually works. Imagine we have a male. Actually, I'll jump ahead a little bit here. Here's our female up here. She's emitting 0, 0, 0. Here's a male facing north. That's the little black triangle. It's facing north, and it enters the female's territory from the southwest. The moment that male enters her territory, she switches from singing 0, 0, 0 to 101. At this point in evolutionary time, a different evolutionary time, 101 means do what you do best. Go straight. 101, 101, the male continues to go straight, and the moment that the male is directly west of the female, she switches her song, and the male turns right, and she goes back to singing 101. At the next time step, a reproduction event takes place. Yeah? Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this side experiment. You can go read it and consider it optional. Okay, let's push on. Okay, last experiment we're going to see in this series. They went back to the beginning. They reset the experiment. They created 1,600 random brains, 800 for the females, 800 for the males. And in this case, they restricted the number of output neurons in the female to just 2. So now there's 4 possible songs. And they restricted the number of input neurons for the male to 2. Yeah? So there's a smaller set of songs that could be sung. Why did they do this? They did this because they wanted to plot in one entire table what every single male was doing.
In the previous set, we saw summary statistics. 77% of the males were doing this, so on. They wanted to really watch now. They're going to run things again, and they're going to watch carefully the evolution of communication. Okay, how do we read this table? As I just mentioned, there are 4 possible songs. You'll notice that in every entry in this table, there's a colon, and to the right of the colon, there are 4 digits, with the exception of this one and this one. Again, I think these are just typos. The 4 separate digits represent the 4 different songs, or the positions of these 4 digits represent the 4 different songs. So the first of the 4 digits represents song 00, the second digit represents song 01, and so on. The actual digit that's sitting in that location, that digit is either 0, 1, 2, or 3, which represents the 4 male motor primitives. So far, so good? Okay, let's take one of these cells at random. Let's take this one here. 1, 0, 1, 2. I apologize if you're in the back. This is hard to see. 1, 0, 1, 2. What does this mean? This means this set of 4 digits represents a set of males that when they hear 0, 0, the first position, they go forward. Oops, I just lost it. 1, 0, 1, 0. Or 1, 0, 1, 2. When these males hear 0, 0, they do 1. They go forward. When they hear the second song, 0, 1, they do 0. Stay still. When they hear the song 1, 0, they do 1. They go forward. And when they hear the fourth and final song 1, 1, they do 2. Turn left. So by reading off the 4 digits on the right-hand side of the colon, it completely characterizes the behavior of a set of males. Everybody see that? A little confusing to read. How about this one up here, 0001? What is that? What male behavior corresponds to that? 0001.
They stay still 90% of the time and just go forward.
It might be 90. It doesn't say how often they do it. It just says most of the time. So when if they hear any of the first 3 songs, they stay still. And if they happen to hear the 4th one, they they go forward. Question?
Is the number on the left side of the colon just like the number of males?
Exactly. The number on the left of the colon is how many males at this point in time correspond to that group. Yeah. So where were we? Over here. 1, 0, 1, 2. In time step 0, there were 7 males that exhibited that behavior or were capable of that behavior. There were 4 males. There should actually be, this is a typo, there should be 4 zeros here. There were 4 males that stood still no matter which of the 4 songs they ever heard. Okay, if you scan your eye over all the numbers to the left of the colons in this table, it's a more or less uniform distribution. If you summed all the digits to the left of the colons, it would sum to 800. We're looking at the behaviors of all 800 males, and we're looking at the distributions of all of those behaviors. Everybody see how to read this table? Okay, this is what we would expect at T0, right? Everybody's behaving randomly. We get a uniform distribution of behaviors. Okay, here's time step 8000. What's happened? Several things. What's the most obvious thing that jumps out at you immediately? Hopefully.
There's a lot of behaviors that have just gone away.
Lots of bad things to do. Tough for the males. Lots of things you can do that are not so great. They've started to clump up into different groups. There's no fitness function here, but we're starting to see what kind of looks like speciation. You can see groups of males that all act identically, and then there's differences, behavioral differences between these groups. Kind of interesting that you get some of these evolutionary dynamics in a very, very simple simulation. What else is going on? We've got more than half of the 800 males doing this. They go forward 3/4 of the time. Again, always generally speaking, a good thing for males to do. But when they hear the second song, they turn right. They never turn left. They don't know how to turn right. I had an old relative who was an immigrant to Canada, never really learned how to drive well, lived in Toronto, a lot of traffic in Toronto. He only ever turned right. Whenever we gave him instructions about how to get somewhere in the city, we had to give him turn right, turn right, turn right. Was terrified to turn left in a big intersection. These males, terrified of turning left. They're like my great uncle Moish, never turn left. Okay. These males turn right, and there's a lot of them. So apparently females have evolved the ability to tell them to turn right under the right conditions. If the male is about to pass a female on her left side, she presumably is saying, turn right, turn right, turn right again, now go straight, right? She cannot tell them to turn left because they don't know how. Okay. Turns out, which is not shown in this table, that these males are actually responding to females, and these females only ever emit signals 1 and 2. The females don't even bother emitting songs 3 and 4. For these males don't need it. They only need 2 songs. They need one song to be emitted reliably that tells them to go straight, and a second song that tells them to turn right. So again, we're not seeing the female behavior here. We have a little bit of a sense of what the females are doing indirectly. We've got females that only ever use 2 songs in their repertoire. They're using half of the songs in their repertoire. Okay. 2,000 time steps later, this is happening. We've still got the majority of males in this group, but there is a pretty considerably sized separate group of males that, again, mostly go straight, but they turn right in response to song 4. And these males tend to be reproducing with females that only emit songs 3 and 4. So not only do we have speciation among the males, there's also speciation among the females. There's a group of females that only ever sing songs 1 and 2, and a separate group of females that only ever sing songs 3 and 4. Turns out that in this experiment, this is not the end of the story. There is an opportunity here. For whom? What happens if these males here wander into the territory of the females that only sing songs 1 and 2? What happens if these males enter the territory of females that only sing songs 3 and 4? What do those males do by definition? There's an opportunity here. For whom? That has both of them. Elaborate. What do you mean by has both of them?
It has 1 and 3. The first 2 songs responds to 1 and 3, and then the last 2 songs it also responds to 1 and 3.
It responds, you're talking about the males. So there's an opportunity here for males. Say it again. Which males?
The ones that have the pattern 1, 3, 1, 3.
Ah, okay.
They respond to both.
That particular group of males, the ones that know what to do when they hear songs 1 and 2, and know what to do when they hear songs 3 and 4, they're already here. There's 20 of them. What do you think's going to happen when I continue to flick through this slide deck?
There's going to be more of them.
Keep an eye on 1313. 1313 at 14,000, 2,000 time steps later. 1313, you've actually dropped in numbers. 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 time steps later. So in this particular experiment, we've now not seen just the evolution of communication, we've seen the evolution of what? What's happened? What do the males understand? No scare quotes now. What do they understand?
How to find mates.
They know how to find mates clearly very well. Why? By listening very well, yes. Again, good lessons for our species.
Does this indicate like they've created a language, sort of?
They're bilingual. The males are bilingual, right? I feel brave, I'm not gonna put scare quotes around it. They literally know how to, when they move into the territory of different females, there's still differentiation among the female population. There are females that only know how to sing songs 1 and 2 under the appropriate conditions, and separate females that only know how to sing 3 and 4, but there are males who know how to respond appropriately to those 2 different sets of songs, those 2 separate languages. Interesting. Some very sophisticated evolutionary and linguistic dynamics going on in this experiment, despite the fact that it's a relatively simple experiment. So, in this experiment, in which there's evolutionary pressure for coordinated behavior, in this case it's just teams of 2, but that's okay, leads not only to the evolution of communication, but relatively sophisticated communication, bilingual communication. We don't have time to get into it in this course, but there are a series of papers about allowing robots to develop their own languages to coordinate group behavior. This is arguably the first example of that phenomenon. Question?
The 1600 is the sum of the males and the females?
No. Oh yeah, good question. That's right. That's right. This should be 800. You're right. Why is it 1600?
It was more than 800 the whole way through.
Was it? Maybe it's 1600 males and 1600 females. I'm not sure. Good observation. Okay. Any questions about any of that? Okay. We've got 3 minutes left, so I am going to, if I can, there we go. We're going to just introduce the next topic, evolving bodies and brains. I started this course by arguing for evolutionary robotics compared to other branches of robotics. The vast majority of robotics that's underway at the moment assumes that human mechanical engineers build the body of the robot, build a drone, build a robot dog, build a robot humanoid, and then use techniques from machine learning, reinforcement learning, classification, categorization, use something else to train the brains of the robots, and off you go. The promise of evolutionary robotics is we want to evolve bodies and brains for robots together because there's particular advantages to doing so. There's an advantage to not presupposing what the right physical structure is for a robot. That's what we're going to look at in lecture 21, 22, 23, and 24. We've now seen a few reasons in this course. What are some of them? Why might we want to automatically design bodies and brains rather than just brains?
Like reproduction.
Sorry?
Like reproduction.
What do you mean by reproduction?
Like the shape of the body is useful in reproduction, so you want to evolve that shape as well as like the brain to do it.
The shape is useful. Useful how?
Well, like in the case of the xenobots that you showed us, like the shape of it like helped it collect more cells.
Good point. So last time I showed you the self-reproducing xenobots, having a Pac-Man shape is a good way to just collect cells or shovel snow or rake leaves. In retrospect, maybe it's obvious, but it wasn't obvious to us at least going in. For certain tasks, it's not so obvious what the right shape of the body should be.
And it promotes diversity within the, I guess if you have a swarm of robots, then you can have robots that perform different tasks or specialize in different things.
Absolutely. So if NASA ever gets to the point where they send 100 or 1,000 rovers or probes to a planetary body, probably not great to have all 100 or all 1,000 have exactly the same physical structure. They all have exactly the same structure. They all have the same sensors and motors. And unbeknownst to NASA, the particular motors that they chose get choked by the particular regolith dust that happens to be there. All 100 are knocked out. There goes an obscene amount of taxpayer dollars. There's strength in diversity. In nature, no one population is physically identical for exactly this reason. You don't want any group of organisms or machines to have a common Achilles heel. Okay, we're out of time. We'll stop there for today. You have a quiz due tonight. You're working on A/B testing. See you on Thursday.